Will we have a third straight month with a busted season pass card in Marvel Snap? I don't think so. I think March is going to give us a little bit of a breather with the X-Men Origins of Apocalypse season. All of the cards were officially revealed in the blog and announcement trailer, so it's time to do a little card review, rating each of the month's cards from 1 to 4 stars, and of course ranking them from best to worst, locking in my predictions so you all can make fun of me when indeed in Sabah Nur, the new season pass card is actually broken yet again, even though I didn't think it would be. But for real, let's go ahead and kick it off with a review for in Sabah Nur. He is a 4/5 with the keyword objective, which reads, have a full front row at each location. When that objective is met, he is then going to have his reward, which is transform into Apocalypse Celestials Chosen, which you can see here is a 4/8. On reveal, swap the lowest power card in your front row at any location with a card from your deck. And you'll see here objective as a keyword reads, an objective completes after the turn if in play with its conditions met. So I think even if you had like an end of turn card, for instance, that summoned something into the front row, that this would still be seen in that scenario as meeting the objective, because it does say after the turn, which means you would still activate your objective if that was the final one, and transform there into Apocalypse, which gives you a 3 power buff, but also, you know, takes presumably something very weak from your front row and maybe transforms it into something way better from your deck, making this sort of like a Jubilee of sorts, like a 4/8 Jubilee that's kind of conditional and on a bit of a delay. We're going to see a theme this month with rocks and rock cards in particular, and like this is a card clearly that could benefit from having a lot of little cheap tokens like a rock in your front spots at a given location, so that you can then take a 0 power rock and turn it into something big and insane like an Infinite in your deck, which, you know, that would effectively make this a 4/28 in total output if you hit that big crazy Infinite, right? But you also could have, you know, a card with negative power, like a downside, say play a hood in one of those first opening spots, and then you get to take your -3 hood downside and then turn that something, that -3 downside, into something really big and nice. So it's sort of like a Lockjaw and a Jubilee, but all attached to a 4/8 as long as you're meeting this condition, which I do think, like, clearly any deck that's, you know, playing Apocalypse is easily going to meet the condition. Like, why else would you ever do this? I mean, I guess there's some risk with certain locations and stuff. If you roll like a Sanctum Sanctorum, can you still fill that? But, you know, if you have, say, a Debris or a Squirrel Girl, you still might be able to fill those locations. Even could have like some little move cards or something sometimes, throw a Nightcrawler in there for some flexibility or whatever. Might not hurt you too much, probably not as like location punished as, say, like a Cerebro deck could be. Probably still lots of ways to hit. So then the question is just kind of a deck building one for me, where it's like, okay, well, if this deck is running a lot of little stuff and filler and it's running the hoods and all that sort of thing, I need to make sure the balance is right, where I don't accidentally pull a hood out of my Apocalypse Celestials Chosen, right? Like if hood is still in the deck, this might just pull a card, you know, might pull the hood. It doesn't say like your highest power card in deck or anything like that. So can you actually afford to run a hood? Maybe not. You might need to make sure you don't accidentally get worse off of your Apocalypse Celestials Chosen. But the good news is, you know, as a 4/8, like it's a pretty solid stat line at a base. So assuming you gain even just 3 or 4 points on average from this swap, and you should if you're running the right sort of stuff, you know, a squirrel, a rock, whatever, on average, you're probably going to gain 3, 4, 5 points. Sometimes you might hit those home runs and gain 15, 20 points or whatever, but you don't necessarily need to, because that's still going to make Apocalypse's, you know, total output is even 3 points makes him a 4/11. For instance, you might also, you know, just get to benefit from like multiple on reveals in some cases, like take a small on reveal, trade it out, get another one. It's not just like a stat play, but also finding stuff in your deck kind of play as well. They could be a nice upside. So I don't think this is going to be like an absolute, you know, build around star of the show like both Shulao and Star-Lord were. They were each, you know, defining pieces of the meta, the key in a given deck. I don't think this is that card. I don't think it has that like crazy upside that just makes it feel like it's the most important card in the deck. I do though think it's going to be another good card. Like I think a lot of builds could kind of go around this. Again, it won't be the only reason to do that deck, but it's just like a good enough piece of the puzzle that you'll find something to do nice with it. And it's got enough kind of flexibility that as long as you're planning to play 6 cards out, this might still be a really nice sort of upside for you. So all in all, I think a pretty good card. Moving on here to Isca the Unbeaten, which this is, I'm pretty sure, not the base art for this card, but it is what the Marvel Snap team put on the blog. It's sort of like the base art. Every other card had the base art, so I don't know. I'm using this. Pretty sure this is a variant, though. Anyway, Isca is a 4/3, which is a big change from when we first saw this in the data mine. I think she was initially a 3-cost card, and I thought she seemed really, really strong. Frankly, I still think she has a lot of intriguing impact potentially as a 4-cost card with this end of turn. If you're losing this location, double this card's power, which I think it's going to be actually very easy to push this up to a 4/12, where basically, you know, if your opponent already has 7 power somewhere, you just play Isca on turn 4, right? If she's going to double to 6 right away. They've got 7, so she's going to double again to 12. And you actually have a chance then to maybe even push her to 24. But you also create some really high friction scenarios where the opponent says to themselves, like, well, crap. When she doubled to 12, she flipped and started winning that location, right? So maybe they had 7-0, and then it eventually became, 12-7 because of the Isca doubling, right? So now they have this dilemma where it's like, if I need to beat this Isca, right, I can't just beat her by a little, because then she'll double again, and I can't beat that 12-point check when she goes from 12 to 24. Like, it's just way too much for me to overcome. So I kind of just have to give up the Isca, even if they're only winning by 3 or 4 points. You just can't attack it unless you have like Shadow King or Shang-Chi or whatever, some kind of direct answer. But just from a power to power standpoint, there is, maybe you could do like a Fin Fang Foom or something to try to, that could certainly be big enough. But basically, you either have to go for an absolute home run to surpass her power because of that weird check she offers, or you just have to give up that location because you're just saying, like, dude, if I just go at this a little, she's too much. She immediately counters any play I make here that's not outrageously large if she is indeed going from 12 to 24, which could absolutely be happening often on turn 6. Beyond that, we've got this whole end of turn thing too. Keep in mind that could actually be going off multiple times in an end of turn deck, where maybe she just goes to 6 normally, but then jumps to 24 at the end of the game, or even more in an end of turn deck. Like, that is actually like like, doubling is always so scary, right? And if you're doubling multiple times, you're doubling, like, forget it. This will absolutely, start farming locations. Now, of course, like, eventually she would stop going off, but if you did like 4 off an Invisible Woman combos and chains or whatever, like, eventually she'd stop going off, but only once you were already winning anyway, so it'd be fine. Like, it doesn't matter if she misses the final few or whatever, that at that point, you're winning. So she could really get to some crazy totals and challenge some silly numbers from opponents in an end of turn deck. I don't necessarily know if she even needs to do that. And the crazy thing is too, like, even a 4/12, which is a very reasonable outcome, is above rate for a 4-drop. Like, that's a really solid 4-drop body with this upside and friction bonus that I think goes even further. So that's crazy. We haven't even talked about the fact that you can actually buff this card as well. Every time she gains a buff, you're basically doubling that again, maybe even getting to those kind of high friction breakpoints sooner. It's like, this is a 4/5. You play it into a 6 power location. It's like, man, she's already 10, and creating problems for the opponent, because it's like, well, crap, now even 10 is like, it's doubling to 20, and it's like, God, I got to match so much. So I think this card's very strong potentially. I think not only an end of turn card, maybe just a good card beyond that in good card decks where this just kind of slots in. I think we've got like 1 card per turn decks, like, Doom 2099 style decks. This could actually go in that style of deck. Is just like a really good generic 4-drop that you're happy to fill your curve with. So all in all, I think Isca the Unbeaten here is a pretty sweet card that looks very, very, very good. Moving on to Juggernaut Horseman of War. This is a 2/2, another objective card. This one is have 6 different powers among your other cards in play. So that means unique values for its power, kind of like Sage is looking at different power values. So will Juggernaut, but it can be across the entire board, not in a location, obviously. And if that is met, then his reward is gaining +6 power, making him a 2/8. Which I will say, like, having 6 different powers is not totally crazy. It actually was 7 when I think initially saw this in the data mined version, which, you know, it sounded a little harder. 6 does sound a little more achievable. I don't think it's crazy. I do think some decks just like don't have that many cards out. You know, if you're looking like I thought initially, hey, maybe this could be a cool card as like a 2-drop and a big ramp deck or a once per turn deck like the Doom 2099 stuff. Sometimes it's a little harder for those to actually get that many different cards at different power values because they're just not playing that many cards. And sometimes, you know, they line up. Like Doom 2099 is 6 power, and so is Cosmic Ghost Rider. Now, of course, the Doom 2099 could get buffed to be a different value, but you know what I'm getting at. It's like, you know, they just sometimes crisscross and you might only have 4 or 5. So I think you have to have a deck that's running enough stuff, just a lot of random little bodies and so on, where it's like, you know, I happen to have a 2, happen to have a 3, happen to have a 4, and it's like, okay, we're halfway there. You know, a card like Shauna, for instance, could just like instantly fill this out. It's a pretty good chance you get like a 2 and a 3 and a 4 because if Shauna occasionally get an Ebony Maw or whatever, you're halfway home. So there will be some decks that can achieve this. I guess the question for me then, though, would be just like, do they need a 2/8? Like, how good is a 2/8? You know, for instance, that kind of zoo deck conversation, it could be just better than a Dazzler, for instance. Like, Dazzler's often a 2/8 in a zoo deck. Maybe Juggernaut's actually just a little bit more of a reliable play for you because you're planning to get there anyway. So Juggernaut just becomes a 2/8 that's like slightly more achievable. Still not like crazy numbers. It's competitive. You know, Moondragon is good. Sometimes just a 2/8. Chamber sometimes is a 2/8, and both of those are good. So I don't want to write it off at all. I think it's solid. It's just probably going to be pretty narrow in the decks that actually think this one's the best 2-drop for them. There's just so many premium 2-drops to choose from. And when we think about the strongest ones right now, a lot of them have like very specific niche homes. This one would be more of the kind of flexible jack of all trades 2-drop. But that does also mean sometimes just decks won't need it because they have the more specialized, like discards never going to run this because you got Morbius or whatever, right? Like a generation deck's going to have Collector. Like, you know, there might only just be a few little decks left over here and there where Juggernaut becomes their best option. So fine, just, you know, kind of maybe a rare one to see. All right, next up here is Gambit, Horseman of Death, a 3/3 with objective, play 5 total cost of created cards, and then randomly destroy up to 4 total cost of enemy cards. I'm not going to lie to you, it does kind of bother me how those don't match up. I really wish those were symmetrical. I also wish somehow they synced up with his power and energy cost, but it's just... just my brain doing brain things. Anyway, so the idea here is, of course, is a created card deck. Do keep in mind it does say play 5 total cost of created cards, not have. So initially I saw this, I was like, oh, Dr. Doom's, you know, it's done. You got 12 power or 12 cost of created cards because of the 2 Doom bots. Easy work. But no, it does say play them. So you are going to have to actually like generate them in hand and then play them. So I'm immediately going to something like a Victoria hand deck that's already trying to make a lot of stuff. And, you know, suddenly you play your Victoria hand and your Frigga, you've got that new Victoria in hand, that's 2. Maybe you play a Valentina or an Iron Patriot or a Hood to get in the extra little steps. Maybe you're running a Sentinel in a C3 deck and you're playing multiple Sentinels alongside your Gambit in order to create some cards there. And you know, there's a few different angles you could approach this one, but obviously a Frigga type Victoria hand deck makes a lot of sense. Also Erisham might be a total possibility for this. Of course, those are all created cards. These don't say specifically created in hand, so something like Erisham. And you could also do an Agents of Shield deck or a Major Victory deck. Some of these seem a little more far-fetched than others, but the reward here, I will say, I think is pretty good, right? Like 4 total cost of enemy cards. The way I believe that'll work is, you know, it'll like just hit a random target that's 4 or less. If it's like a 2 cost or whatever, then it will again do the same with a 2 or less. If it hits a 1-drop, it might try to find one more 1-drop in order to finish things off. I don't know exactly how smart this will be, but it will probably cap itself out at 4 max. It won't like try to find a 5-drop, right, from the start and give you a bonus, but you might occasionally wipe a 4-drop. You might catch a 3-drop and a 1-drop, 2 2-drops. Sometimes you might hit a 3-drop and then there's nothing left and it just kind of wastes or fizzles that final cost because there's not a 1-drop 2 hit. But ultimately, you know, a Gambit style effect here that does not demand a discard from you. It has kind of a different sort of demand, but also a Gambit that might be able to hit multiple targets, just perhaps less like key targets. You're never going to take out your opponent's like, you know, big 6-drop or 5-drop or whatever because of your Gambit, even though this will often probably be hitting kind of on the final turn. You could definitely imagine a lot of scenarios where you're dumping multiple created cards late from your Moon Girl hand or whatever. I just keep coming up with more and more examples of ways to create cards as we go. So, you know, maybe you do snipe your opponent's Cerebro sometimes, but not often. And that's really my fear here for Gambit. Like, in some ways, it does feel like rather efficient, you know, a 3/3 body that's perhaps removing up to 4 energy worth of stuff from your opponent. That's, you know, pretty easily sometimes 8 to 10 power worth of stuff, sometimes even key effects beyond that. So like numerically, I'm like, okay, this is maybe a 311. This is a 313 in total net output sometimes, which feels solid. It's really just kind of the objective side of it that makes me nervous, because it's like you're really limiting the number of decks that want to run this. And then those decks sometimes have such a, you know, fixed plan and line. I don't know if they want to introduce the chaos of a card like Gambit. Do they really need something like this? Like, does a Victoria hand deck actually make an excuse for this? I don't know. I think they just want to run leaner and do more of the created card stuff. Could an Airshim deck run this? Like, yeah, probably an Airshim deck can run anything, but like, does it make that deck better? Again, I don't really know if it does. So I do think this effect is fine if I think about it just in a vacuum and like just think about it purely numerically. But when I start to consider context and the decks that want to play this, I guess I am finding gaps there. I don't really know where this one goes just yet. Moving on to Caliban, the Horseman of Pestilence. This is a 3/4. The objective here is have 3 cards that are 4 cost or higher in play, and then afflict the highest cost enemy card with 7 power. That is highest cost, not highest power, which that could be a little confusing sometimes, but just keep that in mind. And then -7 power on a 4 power card means your net total output here is 11 power for a 3-drop, which again, numerically sounds pretty great. Also, I do value Affliction a little more than regular power, because that can, of course, hit your opponent's Scarlet Spider or Captain Carter or all these cards that really care about their power value that do actually show up quite a bit in the meta these days. So sometimes that -7 will go even further, or it'll hit an Iron Man location or whatever. Now, of course, you know, you're going to know what it hits and have some influence over that depending on priority and so on. But you might be able to sometimes get lucky and target the right kind of thing if it's a Scarlet Spider and you time it well. As far as meeting the objective here, this one does take a little more work, but I think a perfect shell for this is that kind of Doom 2099 1 card per turn deck that is pretty good in the meta right now, actually. This could be a fantastic 3-drop in that deck, which it currently runs Drax, which is also a really good 3-drop, and sometimes like Mercury and Cannonball. But I think Caliban slots right in perfectly, because the Doom 2099 single-handedly activates this, right? Like the Doom 2099 itself and the Doom bots, already 2 of the 4 cost or higher cards in play. And then, you know, a Dr. Doom actually gives you 3. Dr. Doom itself activates Caliban, so you don't even really need any additional help beyond that. So there are a lot of ways to get multiple bigger cards out. That could just be literally playing on curve 4, 5, 6, or it could be these cards that summon additional units into play that just happen to have high costs, or also, you know, the occasional Monster Islands or whatever, where you get a free 6-drop in play. So, you know, some decks obviously won't be able to run this because they're just running too low, and they don't, you know, a Silver Surfer deck can't use this effectively because they're just not going to have 4 cost or higher cards in play often enough. But I do think that 2099 deck could use this probably better than Drax. That's my instinct. So that's already a really good home for this card, and a few others might pop up here and there. At the same time, you know, I don't think this card's going to feel mandatory in those decks. It's one of those where it's like, it's probably going to feel like a slight boost, but also a card that nobody maybe needs to own just because it's not powerful enough that like, I have to have this. There's a lot of good 3-drops. There's nothing about this one that stands out to me. And, you know, there is an Affliction angle on this as well. Could you have this in an Affliction deck with Ajax or whatever? And it's like, I don't know. They may have a harder time actually meeting the objective here. They may not want to play as many big things as often. So I don't really see an Affliction angle for this one quite as easily as more of that big card or ramp card decks. And even if you're running ramp, it's like you don't usually want to give up your 3 slot. That's your ramp slot for Electro, Luna, Snow, etc. So even like a ramp deck's not that good. It might literally just be a Doom 2099 deck, but I do actually think it's a pretty good card in that shell. Moving on next to Selene, the Horseman of Famine. This is a 4/4 with objective, have 3 cards with no abilities in play. And then you get to steal 5 power from an enemy card here. So at her location, which it does kind of give you some nice little targeting. I will say it's, a lot of points all in one spot, but that's fine. It's a lot of points because, she's going to go to 4/9. The opponent is also going to have -5. So her total output is basically a 14 power card for 4 here, which is clearly very big, right? That's an enormous, just awesome card for 4. Now the objective is a little bit trickier, but as we're going to talk about more and more in this video, we are getting a bit of a rock theme. We're going to see multiple rock synergy cards. In some ways, Sabah Nur is already kind of a rock synergy card where you just want a lot of little rocks in play. And rocks, of course, have no ability, as we know from playing Patriot. Rocks have no abilities. So you might have like a rhino that summons a rock, a debris that summons a couple rocks. Your Selene is already ready to go, making her, an enormous swing. And like you've already got a couple overstated guys in play. You could also have an angle with like a Red Skull deck, for the record, like a Sauron Red Skull deck could be a different approach for this. They do sometimes just like those big 4-drops. The Typhoid Mary style plays. You might have to carve a spot out for herself there. She also doesn't go to 10 power, which is actually really important for Scar as a break point. So little shakier there. I guess also Surtur on top of that. Like that's not maybe as interesting, right? Like that 9 is a big downside in that world, better against Shang-Chi, I guess. But maybe not as clear of a line for me in a Sauron deck, but certainly a rock deck. I mean, theoretically, even a Patriot deck, maybe having a taller card in a Patriot deck could help. I did feel like playing that recently. It was going a little too wide and not quite tall enough. So maybe even an angle there, but I do think certainly a rock deck with some stuff we're going to look at later in the video makes a lot of sense for Selene, and she is a very big number. So next up here, we have Rama-Tut. This is a 4/5 with on reveal. Use 3 on reveals from cards released before Rama-Tut's time. Which has nothing to do with like when he's played. It's not like cards from the first 3 turns or whatever. It is literally cards from before he was released into the game. So if this is released on like, I don't know, whatever, March 20th or something, then any card released before March 20th could be in the pool. Now, I do think it's maybe like a little bit of a curated pool. I think I heard that or saw some speculation around that. But also, Snap.fan apparently data mined the cards that are in the pool and available. If you want to take a really close look at this here, just like pause this or screenshot it if you want to look at it closely. But it's a good idea. There are some downside cards like Destroyer, could be crazy risky. But there are also, a lot of really good cards. You could hit, a White Tiger. Like that's a fantastic effect that could be just like crazy, crazy powerful. You get like Spider-Woman, which surprisingly okay for an otherwise bad card, right? Like especially when you're getting 3 of these all combined together, you could see some really, really good turns out of this. A Jubilee into a White Tiger into a Spider-Woman, for instance, like insane turn. That would be a ridiculous amount of output for a card that's already a 4/5, right? You'd get an extra 9 off the Tiger, an extra 4 potentially from the Spider-Woman, and who knows what from the Jubilee. So you're talking about you could get an extra 15, 20 points off of this. Other times you might hit all 1-drops and maybe not feel like you made as big of an impact. But I actually think this card looks kind of nuts because a 4/5 at a baseline is a solid enough stat line that you can take a little risk, right? Like you can take a flyer on this because sometimes it's going to feel like it steals games because it just did something so crazy and so big that it was like just backbreaking for the opponent. Like just the amount of tempo it provides or whatever off 3 on reveals is going to be worth it. And games where you hit Destroyer or whatever, like, yeah, okay, I'll take the 1 cube, I'll retreat. But like sometimes it's just going to feel like a really solid body. And just any kind of generic good card deck that's just stacking a lot of great stuff together probably makes space for Rama-Tut. I think it could be crazy in an Arishem deck. It's just like, your turn 3 play. Imagine this on turn 3, how much stuff you could actually get out in that scenario is pretty crazy. So look, I know it's a wide breadth of stuff, and I know some on reveals aren't really that helpful or inconsistent or, may whiff just given the game state or location or deck or whatever it is, right? But you're usually going to get something pretty good, at least on one of these, and sometimes you'll go nuts. And on a 4/5, I think that's okay. I think you can sustain a little risk and sustain some whiffs because you're going to get a lot of high rolls, and I think the floor is actually not that bad. I bet on average you get like 7 to 8 power worth of stuff out of Rama-Tut, and I think that's going to make him worth it. I think this card is actually sneaky pretty darn strong. So our last two cards here are going to be the introduction of this rock archetype. The first of which will be released is Sandstorm, a new 2-mana collectible skill. It's on reveal, add 2 rocks to your hand, give them +1 power for each of your front row characters. So like we saw within Sabah Nur, we talked about how there's going to maybe be this kind of rock deck where you're summoning a lot of little rocks and now maybe generating some additional rocks that have big power numbers. Because if you have 6 cards total in those front row spots, this means you're going to get 1/6 rocks in hand, which is, you know, basically this is kind of a 2-cost hood that's giving you 2 demons in hand in that scenario, except they're rocks, and you don't have to have the -3 power on board from the hood, right? So it's kind of like this super hood that also plays really nicely with things like Victoria Hand we already talked about, which could lead into the Gambit deck, but also plays really nicely with the next card we're going to talk about, which is Ozymandias, which gives your rocks an additional +3 power. So you've got this whole little deck here kind of coming together that's about rocks. It's about in Sabah Nur, turning those rocks maybe into, for instance, an Ozymandias. You could even have like Patriot stuff in the mix. You've got Selene in the mix as well. And even though all of these cards kind of in a weird way point in slightly different directions, you can maybe just stuff all of them into this deck and make this kind of rock deck that I actually think has a surprising amount of potential, because you don't need this to actually be 6 power to be a solid card. I think adding like 2 1/4 rocks to hand, for instance, would still potentially feel like a pretty good play. A little bit of a question on timing on this, because it's like probably turn 4 or 5 when you'd want to play this. If you're playing in Sabah Nur on 4, what are you playing on turn 5? If you want to play Ozymandias, then on turn 6, you would only be able to play 1 rock potentially alongside it. So a little bit of clunkiness maybe on timing here. You know, a Squirrel Girl though alone could kind of even make this a decent turn 2 play. I think like a 1/3 rock in hand, 2 1/3 rocks in hand wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing even for your turn 2 play. So there will probably be some windows for it in the average game. I think it's a pretty solid piece of the rock puzzle here, and I'm really excited to play a rock deck because of our next guy. And this is Ozymandias, a 5/9 ongoing. Your rocks have +3 power, which this actually got nerfed a little bit since we saw it on the data mine. I think it was a 5/10 initially, which surprised me. I honestly think 5/9 still sounds crazy big for this sort of card, because like the amount of power this could push out across rocks is big. I think games where you have 5 or 6 rocks down is not crazy at all, which means this is an extra 15, 18 power on your 5-drop that's already 5/9. You're talking about 27 power, 30 power potentially in output off of your 5-drop. That's pretty crazy. And whether that's generating rocks via Sandstorm or doing stuff like playing the Debris or the Rhino, I do think there's a pretty cool card. You even got Mole Man, by the way, we forget about, but Mole Man's another rock synergy card. There's a lot of ways to get rocks into play. This is like, if you look, it's kind of like Patriot too. Like Patriot basically says your rocks have +2 power and he's a lot cheaper. So you could argue like, hey, maybe I just like Patriot a little bit better. Guess what? You could do both. You could do both and make your rocks have 5 power, guys. It's a possibility. But in a weird way, I don't mind that this is more expensive, because like, you know, an extra 1 power per rock is a big deal, but it's also just a big guy himself. And if you're spreading a lot of little power via rocks, you know, 3 here, 5 here, 3 here, whatever, right? Having one big splash can actually be really helpful. You maybe have in Sabah Nur or Selene Horseman as another like big, taller threat in a given location. I think it's actually going to line up pretty well. I think this is a new archetype, which is really cool to see, by the way. Like a totally brand new archetype. And I think this is going to feel like a very, very powerful card when it hits, which is a little surprising because this is a Series 4 card that they're giving away in a game mode. Like, if I had any hesitation about this card's power level, it's that usually they don't give out good cards in the game modes. Like we just got Starhawk, perhaps one of the worst cards ever made. It's bad, guys. It's so hard to play. Also, one of the most confusing cards, apparently, which I didn't realize, but basically everybody thought that card was an end of turn card, basically, where it went off every single turn and still didn't think it was good. Once they realized it went off only once, it was obviously very bad. And in fact, I brought up that fact with Second Dinner. You guys may have seen my tweet about this. I told Second Dinner, hey, a lot of people were very confused about how Starhawk works. I'm sorry for this like little aside here. I was like, they're very confused about how Starhawk works. They actually changed his text later that day. It was pretty sick, honestly. I made a whole comment in the morning in the like creator Discord. A bunch of other creators were like, yeah, this actually confused me. It's super confusing. So they went in and changed his text so it looks a little bit less like it was an end of turn effect. Still a terrible card. They need to change his numbers because he's bad. But I was impressed that they actually listened to feedback and implemented a change quickly, because one of my biggest criticisms of Second Dinner historically was that they never listened to feedback and never implemented changes. So I have to acknowledge when they got one right. Not the strongest precedent, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say, hey, you got it right this time. So anyway, that would be the only risk for Ozymandias, is that usually we don't get good cards, but I think he's going to be pretty good despite the small nerf and despite the Series 4 game mode release. I think he's Series 4 for sure. I'm hopeful he's actually really nice and they're just giving you a good card. So all that said, let's go ahead and rate these cards from 1 to 4 stars from best to worst. Isca the Unbeaten is a 4-star card. Ozymandias is a 4-star card. Rama-Tut is a 4-star card. Selene, Horseman of Famine is a 3-star card. Sabah Nur is a 3-star card. Caliban, Horseman of Pestilence is a 3-star card. Sandstorm is a 3-star card. Juggernaut is a 2-star card. Gambit, Horseman of Death is a 2-star card. Yeah, there you go. I don't even really think Gambit and Juggernaut are that bad. Just maybe just sort of a deck fit problem, really. I just don't know exactly who's going to run them. But, I think if they find a spot, they have the numbers to be good. Just context is a little bit of a struggle. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's a pretty strong month. Nothing that's like crazy broken, scary, like the Star-Lord or Shulao level. But I think some pretty solid playable cards, and maybe a brand new archetype coming to light as well, which is pretty sweet. So actually looking forward to this month quite a bit with the new keyword and all the fun stuff. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, I will see you around.